Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am head of news for the Cradle. As usual, I am joined by my colleagues, content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmeen Narwani. So let me set the stage for what's happening today. First of all, it's day 199 since Operation Al-Aqsa Flood and since the start of the genocide in Gaza. And it's also the aftermath of both the Iranian retaliation against Israel, which was this massive display of power, and the Israeli retaliation to Iran, which I think we can say was the opposite. In what was described as a limited attack that targeted the city of Isfahan in central Iran. And according to the Israelis, they targeted some air defenses that around this uranium enrichment facility near Natanz. And they say some Israeli jets fired outside of Iranian territory, and that they sent some quadcopters to essentially confuse their air defenses. But in the larger scheme of things, I think what we just saw was Iran, like a really, showing off its military muscle. And Israel, just like in the words of an aide for the Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, when asked, about the Israeli strike, his response was, "What strike?" And that's kind of what we have seen in Iranian media since then as well, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the Iranians are denying there was any external attack on the country. And, the problem is, as opposed to before, when what Israeli officials would say was published as a given, today, whatever Israel says on virtually any subject is no longer credible. So I think the Iranian response. I mean, here's the problem. Before Israel could say we've hit this, and the Iranians are denying it. Now people are going, what are the Iranians saying? Oh, nothing happened. There's videos of people walking in parks because it was a Friday when they struck, which is the Iranian official weekly religious holiday. And so people were out and about. And so Israel had nothing to show for it. And, I think we're at the point where we have to write the obituary on this strike, potentially. This was a massive Israeli dud. But let's consider that Israel had initially said that their retaliation to Iran would potentially be a regional and much larger one, setting the stage for, and preparing the global public to accept an massive Israeli strike against Iran. But none of that happened.
Exactly. Today, as we record this, the New York Times came out with a report that said that Israel originally planned to launch a much wider counterstrike on military targets, including near Tehran. That was the plan. That's what the New York Times says. And then they say, like Joe Biden got on the phone and Western liberal democracy did this thing, and they convinced Benjamin Netanyahu to, just do this tiny little strike. That ended up being, after the strike, one of these IRGC commanders in Iran was asked, what is going to be the response? And the response was, you already seen the response. And to your point, Sharmeen, about life continuing normally and all that, the Iranians went very hard on this message, on this message on the media, on mocking what the Israelis decided to call a response. But it wasn't just in Iran that we saw a response, though, right? Because we saw also, at the same time, we saw Israeli airstrikes in Syria against army positions in the south. And this was a few hours after a faction of Palestinians militants that fight in support of the Syrian government got killed by ISIS.
I have this further ground forces of the Israeli military who targets Palestinian fighters in the Syrian theater, specifically Palestinian fighters of the Liwa al-Quds battalion.
Yeah, especially you were there in the Syrian war and you were very active. We've seen a lot that ISIS started to penetrate near Damascus and around Damascus. They first started to penetrate the Palestinian camps in Damascus.
Yarmouk and others, yeah.
Yeah, right. So first, regarding the strike that happened on Iran, I think it can be named as a security operation, not a military operation. That's why the Iranians didn't retaliate, or they said which military strike, because attacking Iran, which is 1.6 million kilometers squared, with 3 drones, of course it will do nothing, and I don't think they will retaliate for such thing. But also what we saw, the information is still vague, we saw Israeli missiles in Iraq. Somebody downed them, or there was a failed launch from an Israeli military airplane. There's many videos and photos of Israeli missiles falling in Iraq near the border and south of Baghdad. So maybe they wanted to attack Iran, or they tried to attack Iran. But as we know, and we mentioned before, Israel can't attack Iran alone. As we saw, it can defend itself against Iran alone. So maybe they didn't take the green light from the U.S.
But well, there must have been a green light if we see downed missiles. But what that suggests is, since in Iran all that was spotted were these quadcopter drones, that there might have been 100% interception of Israeli missiles. Take that, Tel Aviv.
Not 99, 100%.
100%.
But also because I saw in the Western media, many officials talked about that they were very pissed, and Biden was pissed because Israel only informed the U.S. minutes before, or 1 hour before, striking the consulate in Syria. So I think if the Israelis did the same technique, they tell their Western allies, and specifically the U.S., is that, oh, look, now we are going to target Iran. I think at the present time, the U.S. won't allow that.
So what accounts for this being a massive Israeli dud? I mean, let's consider the possibilities. It's possible that the Iranian military intercepted every single incoming missile, which would then allow them to confidently say there was no external attack on Iran. There was no missile that came in, and the drones could have been launched within Iran's borders. Let's consider that.
Yes.
So either Israel didn't have the means to penetrate Iran's defenses, or because, or its staunchest allies opposed it so heavily. And this doesn't just mean the U.S. and Western allies. This means Russia and China too. And I feel very strongly that Russia and China have behind the scenes come into play now. Since Israel has tried to normalize the discussion of striking nuclear targets in Iran, and even potentially using nuclear weapons on Iran, even if they're limited nuclear strikes. Russia and China has nothing to do with support for Iran and their strategic alliance with Iran. This has everything to do with 2 of the biggest nuclear powers on Earth deciding that we are not going to let an upstart, pissat little undeclared state use these weapons in any shape or form. You must consider that, which, by the way, would then mean if Russia and China has come into the mix and applied their pressures in various ways, maybe even providing Iran the defensive needs. I think Iran has those and wanted to showcase them, but intel, etc. That means that the UN Security Council's permanent 5 members, rallied to wear down Israel on any kind of strike. So this could account for why the strike was. So A, Iran shut down missiles, and we've seen physical proof of this on the border with Iraq. And B, nobody would allow this. No nuclear power would allow this.
Yes. So I think, what we've seen over the past couple of, more, like 3 weeks or so, since the attack on the consulate in Damascus was, first of all, the Israelis saying, we didn't think Iran would get this angry. We wouldn't think it would cause Iran to retaliate. So, first diplomatic failure is just like not to consider your enemy, but, consider an act of war as an act of war. And then not telling their partners in the U.S. And then I also want to mention that when they realized that Iran was actually going to retaliate, all of their estimates didn't surpass Iran launching 7 ballistic missiles. Like, that was their ceiling. At first, they were like, okay, maybe they'll launch a few drones and maybe 10 ballistic missiles. And then as the days went on, because let's not forget, Iran made Israel wait for like 12 days, right? Like the frog in the boiling water. And then when it came, of course, took them by surprise. I mean, took them by surprise for the scale of it, not like for the actual attack, which was repelled thanks to the help of, among others, Jordan, France, UK, etc. And then you also have the response to so then you have this very, weak retaliation against Iran, which even in the New York Times, the Israeli officials are saying it was only 2 missiles, that they fired 2 missiles, and that they themselves shot one down because they didn't want to inflame tensions anymore. A lot of self-control from Tel Aviv all of a sudden in the retaliation. And then the response of these racist, these like extremely racist National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who just went on Twitter and wrote "Fuel." That was like of the extreme far right in Israel. This is how they saw. So it just kind of compounded this very bad decision that has made them look a bit like clowns. But then we also need to consider that there's many reports that say this weak response is because the U.S. has agreed to help them or, cover them as they go into Rafah.
Maybe, but I think also we did mention a very important point that also last week before the Israeli retaliation, if you can say it's retaliation, a head of IRGC talked to the TV and said that they will reconsider the fatwa of the nuclear bomb if Israel attacked and everything escalated. I think this is...
If there was a nuclear element to the attack, either from the Israelis or the targets were nuclear in Iran.
Yeah, 100%. And
was this said before or after the attack?
No, this was said before the attack, and I think this made the Israelis rethink their attacks, because we all know that there's a fatwa in Iran which prohibits the use and the manufacturing of nuclear weapons.
Of weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction, but that's what the Israelis are trying to portray to the world, that Iran is going to have a nuclear bomb, and they are saying this like since 30, 40 years. And now the Iranians said, if you will attack our nuclear facilities or use a technical nuclear or mass destruction bomb against us, we will start manufacturing atomic bomb. This was a very important speech, and it created the deterrence between the two countries.
But here's the thing about this particular speech. This was a top IRGC commander in charge of the safety of the nuclear facilities. He said this, right? He said the nuclear doctrine and policy of the Islamic Republic could deviate from the considerations announced in the past. This fatwa is a religious prohibition. But then earlier today, the spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, he said that he stressed that Iran has repeatedly said its nuclear program only serves peaceful purposes and that nuclear weapons have no place in their nuclear doctrine. So to me, what this looks like is just like, they're just trying to quell tensions. Just be like, okay, if this was the Israeli response, that doesn't mean that we need to go, and do something crazy.
I'd like to talk a little bit about where we are in this war. I mean, so far, including in both the Iranian strikes and Israel's counter whatever that was, we're still, those strikes against each other are still in the realm of sending messages. This is not actually a hot war yet. The messages are being immediately interpreted by the influential global powers for us. Okay, this is just a message. Don't worry about it. It's still being controlled. This never would have happened just a few years ago with Israel. Israel would have hit back anyone who came at them massively. Now Israel's being contained. And I want to read a quote from Maariv newspaper in the last week. Maariv is a Hebrew language newspaper in Israel. It was a sharp, brief, and shocking transition beginning on Saturday, October 7th, 2023 at 6:30 a.m. Within 24 hours, the time it took us to understand what happened, Israel went from an invincible empire basking in the euphoria of arrogance and a sense of superiority, I and no one else, to being defeated and besieged by a regional superpower. We've reached a situation where every party in the region uses missiles and drones against us. In other words, Israeli deterrence is completely dead. It was deterrence, 1, and qualitative military advantage, firepower, 2. That was Israel's entire military doctrine. The deterrence is gone. And with it, the notion that Israel has, it's built a conventional army by and large, conventional military arsenal by and large, that costs it a lot to have, to develop, and to maintain. Whereas Iran, Ansarullah in Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Iraqi militias have shown that they can use $2,000, $1,000 pieces of equipment, and Israel no longer has deterrence. We've reached a situation where every party in the region uses missiles and drones against us. So I want to put out something there that could come and bite me in the ass very shortly. But it is possible that the war that started, the strategic messaging and hot war that started on October 7th by the Palestinian resistance, ended on April 13th with the entry of Iran directly into the war. Now, that doesn't mean that battles couldn't continue. But keep this in mind, because in Syria, we kind of saw the same thing. On September 30th, 2015, when the top security bodies in Russia gave the go-ahead for the Russian Air Force to enter Syrian skies, the strategic war of the NATO Gulf countries against Syria was lost. Battles continued. Syria is still mired in, the economic and whatever fallout from the war. But the war was over strategically. The war was over in Syria on September 30th, 2015. In this scenario, can we say that the war started on October 7th was strategically finished and over and done with on April 13th with the Iranian strikes? Again, a major miscalculation by the Israelis, by the Americans, by the other axis, because they've been watching Iran's strategic patience play out for so long. There's even a term for it, Iran's strategic patience. They didn't realize in the 6 months prior to these strikes, the Iranian strikes on Israel, that Iran was putting the finishing touches on its missile arsenal, its massive program that was started after the Iran-Iraq war, when it determined for itself that it would never again allow itself to not have defensive capabilities and offensive as a deterrence, right? Iran's missile program has now been finished, which means Iran has moved from strategic patience into active deterrence. And that is the only reason we saw Iran strike Israel back directly. This means now that the Israelis from the West have seen this, all of their calculations, have fallen by the wayside. Oh my God, Iran will step up now. Everyone's calculations in the region, right? 6 months, what's Iran doing? It's not going to attack. Iran had to finish its program. It finished its program. Now it's game on. Can any country, including the Americans, who have lost every single time they have war game scenarios against Iran, irregular warfare exercises, every single time they've lost at these games, unless they've rigged the game, changed the rules, started over, etc. And there's a famous one everyone should look up. In 2002, the U.S. Department of Defense ran a war game against Iran, an unnamed country, but everyone understood to be Iran, in which within 48 hours, the red team, quote unquote, the Iranian team had taken out the entire U.S. naval capabilities in the Persian Gulf, despite the fact that the Americans had jammed all their communication systems, etc. The red team commander, who was an American colonel, was so mad that they stopped the game and tried to rewrite the rules and start again, that he quit the game and he went public with it, which doesn't often happen. Now, this was, I think, at a cost of around $200 to $300 million, the biggest war game the Americans had ever won in their history. So here's the thing. The American Pentagon, why does the U.S. Pentagon not go directly to Iran? If Iran's such an evil country and, the cause of all its problems in the region, it's because the Pentagon knows it can't win against Iran and knows that there are many surprises that are coming that will come from Iran that the Americans can't anticipate. This is why I'm saying the war was over on April 13th. If the Americans went full force to stop an Israeli reaction And imagine if the Americans didn't go full force and did allow an Israeli reaction, and then everything was intercepted. I don't know which is worse.
Either one, honestly, either one, because I agree with you. What you're saying that that this is a new, as the Iranians themselves like to say, a new equation. New equation has been enforced of the region.
Every single thing is new. Every tactic, every weapon, every consideration.
And it's worth highlighting that the attack that the Iranians did, what you're saying, strategically put an end to this war, it wasn't even their newer arsenal, right?
Yeah, they said that they were old stock, and recent information tell us that there's one missile that we are certain that was used, which was a MAD missile. And the newer versions of the Iranian missile arsenal was not used. And this, of course, sends a military message to Israel and to the US that we penetrated all these defenses that you were prepared for, and you were prepared for 12 days. So next time, if you want to retaliate or to attack Israel, we will not tell you prior, like 72 hours, I think they told them that they will attack. And if we want to attack, we can attack for 1, 2, 3, 1 week.
They said within seconds they would retaliate.
Yeah,
but also, it's a good point you made. The length of a war, a confrontation between Israel and its adversaries in the region is something Israel cannot sustain. Financially, doesn't have enough stockpiles of munitions. It just doesn't exist. The American factories can't turn them out fast enough. So it is in Iran's interest to have a protracted conflict, and it is not in Israel's interest. Israel only needs a short, fast burst. But I think this can lead us into the next subject, which is what the rest of the axis of resistance has been doing since these strikes, Iran strikes on Israel, which Iran, again, did alone by itself. And, this weekend I was thinking about military strategy, like long-lost smart military thinking that we don't see in the Western theaters and the Western, from the Western high brass anymore. Takes everybody back to Sun Tzu, right? The Art of War, because you want to go there for your pearls of wisdom. You have nothing to look at now. And, Sun Tzu said the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, which goes to our now viral boiling the frog analogy. So while Iran did that definitive strike by itself on April 13th, what is happening with its allies in the region, its non-state actor allies in the region, that will protract this war for Israel and further debilitate its deterrence, its morale, its fighting spirit, its confidence in leadership, and ultimately lead to the exodus of Israelis from Israel, which we have been seeing in growing numbers since October 7th. What has the resistance axis been doing?
So first of all, let's start with Ansarullah in Yemen. Ansarullah in Yemen, they already successfully stopped any Israeli or Israeli linked ship from passing through the Red Sea and going to Israel. That's why recently we're not hearing a lot from them, because it's already done.
They're done.
Yeah, they are done. Although the US and the West, they made like 3 alliances, but of course all the alliances failed in front of Ansarullah. And now if you want a ship to pass through the Red Sea, it should say no contact Israel, or it should not be linked to any Israeli entity or individual.
Ansarullah has imposed a new normal on the world.
100%. Yeah. And of course, in the face of the US Navy and British and France Navy.
Exactly, the entirety of NATO, essentially. I mean, not the entirety, but the representation.
And especially that they are in these waters since decades, and they know them. Yeah, the Americans know. And still, Ansarullah managed to stop any Israeli ship or linked ship passing through the Red Sea.
A very serious question, Karim. Do you think Ansarullah fighters have gills?
No, but they have bones. Yeah, and the most significant thing that happened this week came from the Iraqi resistance, because since the past 2 or 3 months, the Iraqi resistance halted their operation against the US, and they decreased their operation against Israel because they said they left the door open for diplomacy. But 2 days ago, Qatar Hezbollah in Iraq, there is a statement. And the Qatar Hezbollah in Iraq, they are one of the most powerful in Iraq. They said that it became very clear that there is no Western they mean the US, of course, intention to leave Iraq. And they declared that the Islamic resistance in Iraq took the decision to return to military action and that they will escalate in the near future.
Let's also make clear that this was as a result of a massive strike against the Hashd-Shabi elements, the Iraqi resistance elements just a few days ago.
Yeah.
So even though the Iraqi resistance had backed off now for well over a month, it was, the Americans and Israelis are denying it. It was an American strike.
I would put this massive explosion as part of the Israeli retaliation because, first of all, it happened like a day after the attack in Iran. And the U.S. was very quick to come out and say it wasn't us.
Which means, again, the Israelis trying to drag the Americans back into Iraq, because also we have heard from the Iraqi government in just the last 2 weeks that a deal has been done. A written deal has been done between the Iraqi government and the U.S. forces in Iraq that will provide a timeline and means for a U.S. troop exit from Iraq. So now Israel potentially strikes at the Iraqi resistance, who had said they would take a step back and not attack U.S. targets in Iraq anymore. So Israel's tried to raise the gun. So what does the Iraqi resistance do? It turns around and strikes major American illegal bases in Syria, including U.S. control of the Al-Omari oil field.
100%. They targeted 2 U.S. bases in northern Syria. And just today, a few hours ago, we heard the news that Ain al-Assad base in Iraq was targeted, which is one of the most important and one of the biggest bases, U.S. bases in Iraq. And also, they targeted the three locations in Israel, 2 in the south, including one in Eilat, and one in Juran Heights, which is the Syrian territory that's occupied by Israel. So now, there's escalation from the Iraqi side.
Subdue the enemy without fighting. Really, you have to wrap your heads around this, though. The Americans denied the strike immediately, which can only mean that Israel is the cause of the strikes against U.S. bases in Syria and the oil field that the U.S. occupies in Syria. Israel is the only party with incentive, motivation, and a desire to not allow the Americans out of the Iraqi theater, so it ran an operation.
And if we go back to Lebanon and Hezbollah in the last week, they made 58 operations against Israel. It's a higher number if we compare it to any other week since 6 months.
Yeah, they escalated the Iraq strikes.
Yeah, and also...
Why?
So everything will escalate.
Today they down a $2 million drone as well.
Yeah, Hermes for 450. So, of course, after the statement of the Iraqis and the escalation of Hezbollah and what's happening, and the Iraqis said that we don't see any means of diplomacy that the Western military will leave Iraq. So I think all the region is going to escalation. There's no space for diplomacy, I think. Especially that there's also Rafah. Israel is determined to go to Rafah. Going to Rafah will also lead to escalation.
It's a kind of escalation because what I'm trying to say is that we are still very much in an era of military messages. The bigger players do things specifically to send a message, which is, if not interpreted by hysterical Israel, is interpreted for the Israelis by the Americans. This is what is meant by this. And the various intermediaries, the Omanis, the Qataris, etc., operating in the region. So, I think it's interesting to see that Hezbollah escalated, with a large number and qualitative attacks with a specific message, because today's article at the Cradle is about the Hezbollah escalation, particularly against one of the targets in Israel this last week, was specifically to send the message, a deterrence message against further assassinations of Hezbollah's officials. So we are still in the eras of messages in the war.
So I think, what you say right now, hysterical Israel, is like we've talked about how they are being made to live in a new reality in terms of the regional neighbors. But internally, in Israel, things are falling apart even quicker. Like the war cabinet doesn't trust each other. They're just constantly sniping at each other. This morning, the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, accused his own defense minister of leaking details from security minister, from the security meetings. He's like, Netanyahu has been trying to get rid of Gallant since he started this term in office. Remember, he fired him about a year ago, and they had to walk it back like a week after. And this has just been going on. And then you have, what I said about Ben-Gvir when he came out and just said feeble about the response to Iran.
And the first Israeli military commander resigning.
Yes, the head of the military intelligence in the army, he resigns over the failure of October 7th. He's just the latest in maybe not long, but definitely a list of officials in Israel that have, expressed a mea culpa about what happened on 7 October. And, Benjamin Netanyahu, chief among them, not among them at all. This is a man who is going to do anything and everything to stay in power past all of these crises. Like, he just keeps sinking this country under. And that's just internal. That's just internal Israeli politics. That's not even counting what's happening in the West Bank, where we are about to see the explosion of a third intifada, because the Israeli army, since October 7, has been conducting near daily raids of different camps of Jenin, of Nablus, of Ramallah, of Tulkarem. And in Tulkarem is where it's really, really gotten, kind of out of control a bit. Like, the destruction is comparable to that of Gaza. The arrests by dozens, the murders, I think 16 people killed over the past 5 or 6 days. And the resistance just holding on.
And the settler mob. We've seen mobs of settlers now, armed settlers now attacking Palestinians, shooting at them, randoms, not like Palestinian militants at all. And this goes back to, the U.S. trying to make sure Israel was not handing out weapons to settlers. It basically ordered Israel not to, but that didn't happen. The right-wing element of the Netanyahu coalition has been handing out weapons left, right, and center to the settlers.
Yes. Here's what I want to ask you guys, because in the end, you're just more familiar with the reality of Palestine itself. What is it going to take for this, much anticipated, I guess, third intifada to actually explode in the West Bank? Or has it already exploded?
I think it's exploded already. And since 2021, May 2021, when Palestinians from Gaza, from 1948 Palestinians from East Jerusalem, Palestinians from the West Bank rose up. And this is really important, because when others settled down, including Gaza, the West Bank did not. Every single day there were operations, okay? And that has continued now for 3 years. So the Intifada doesn't have to be the Stones Intifada of the 20 years ago. We have to, at the Cradle particularly, because we're trying to explain things out of the box thinking that is occurring in the region and others are not grasping. But stop looking for patterns. Every single thing is new that's happening now. Every single thing. The Russian reaction to what's going on in the region will be new and unprecedented. The Chinese reaction will be new and unprecedented. Even the American reaction will eventually be new and unprecedented. The Iranian reaction has been new and unprecedented. Hezbollah, every member of the resistance axis, has done something that we never expected before. And the Israelis and their allies are sadly behind the times, because they've been looking at these things quite dogmatically. Like, we know even October 7th operations were gamed by the Israelis. The Israelis actually have reports on what would happen if, the security fence was breached in Gaza at many locations and thousands of missiles were shot and thousands of fighters came in at an hour where we were unprepared. They gamed it. They know what the scenario. But even while it was happening, for the hours after it was happening, they couldn't understand, because they are very dogmatic in their thinking. They've gamed everything, but they don't actually know what the enemy is doing now. And that absolutely, again, go back to Sun Tzu, you will see that, wrongly reading the enemy, striking where it's vulnerable. These are all the things that the Axis is doing right now.
And for me, I don't think there will be a third intifada.
It's okay. Go for it.
Because I think the Palestinians in the West Bank, they should protest against the PA before the Israelis. Because the first and second intifada, when they occurred, The PA was with the people of the West Bank.
The PA was once credible for many years, was credible to Palestinians. That's gone.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They don't have to take on the PA. The PA is an arm of the Israeli military, of the Israeli government, of the settler movement. The PA is insignificant. They can flick away at it. The Intifada, it's like imagine fighting, fighting the Saudis when you're in a war with the Americans. Flick. It's not significant. The war is on in the West Bank. It never stopped since May 2021. It's just in a different form.
If you want an intifada, as we know, the intifada 1 and 2, that will include every single person in the West Bank. We can see elderly people.
No, because every single person in the West Bank doesn't have arms. This is an armed intifada. There's the difference.
No. Even if it's not armed intifada, because you will confront people from the PA before confronting the Israeli army.
I disagree. They're at best a road bump, at best. And let's not forget, a lot of PA youth, Fatah youth, are joining the resistance, and they have the arms, and they're probably supplying the arms to the resistance. The PA is, gone. It's finished poll ratings.
Yeah, I know. They are not popular, but they are powerful enough to, for instance, if you declare that you want an intifada, if you're a Palestinian in the West Bank and declare I want intifada, let's protest about what's happening in Gaza. People from the PA will take you before people from
Israel. Palestinian resistance now in this version today is armed. This is never going to be Intifada 1 and 2. That was a different scenario, a different time, and with different weapons, stones. This is a different scenario. We will not go back to a stone Intifada. People might, regular people might, or they might throw shoes. That's not the issue. I'm saying the West Bank is fully blown.
Okay, then if you want an armed intifada, we have to get rid of the PA. It's the same.
Yeah, true. But we do know, or at the very least, there's many reports in Western media saying this, that it's Iran is helping arm the West Bank resistance, which is, to me, is equal parts, again, demonizing Iran, being like, oh my God, they're fueling terrorism, but then also giving them credit by actually, saying the quiet part out loud, which is we are helping these people who are being besieged by armed mobs of settlers under the protection of the Israeli police, and their houses set on fire, and they're arrested with no charge. But, they're kept in detention, in administrative detention for years. No medical care, no food. It's just,
honestly, I'm constantly bewildered by this. I have hints, too, that the Iranians are arming Palestinians in the West Bank, but it defies logic for me on how they're getting arms in. If they're large cash transfers, which allows Palestinians to buy from, the Israeli mafia, the Russian mafia. That I understand. But to actually arm, Jordan, let's look at, Jordan is literally Israel's gatekeeper. Now, we saw this on April 13th and 14th. There's nothing the Jordanians are going to allow.
Well, as far as arming the West Bank, there is, if you believe the sources from the New York Times, they have a couple of routes. One of them goes through Syria, Jordan, and then the Negev Desert, I believe, towards the West Bank with the help of Bedouin smugglers.
I completely discount that New York Times article. That was a story meant to show how Iran could get weapons. It's completely unfeasible. Well, it was simply a narrative.
It looks like a Western guy looking at a Palestinian map and saying, oh, that might be it.
Fantasy, fairy tale, New York Times, stop it already.
They do like their storytelling. So just before we finish up for this week, I just want to touch upon, we have covered Israel. We have covered internally Palestine as well. We have, the retaliation in Iran. And the biggest player here, as usual, is the United States in this sad story that has been unfolding since before 7 October, honestly. What has the United States done over the past few days? They vetoed Palestinian statehood at the UN Security Council. They first wanted to get Ecuador, of all countries, to lobby against Palestinian statehood. That obviously failed, and they had to go and veto again. And they said, we're not against Palestinian statehood, but this is not what we want to do. This is not the vote we want to give. It's just kind of like this double speak that is so common with U.S. officials. Then the reports that I mentioned earlier that in thanks to Israel for launching a limited strike against Iran, that they would actually support the invasion of Rafah, which is looming, which is, ready to go.
Imagine that from the U.S. military. Don't strike Iran, please, please. genocide Rafah.
Yeah, keep killing Palestinians because you're very good at that.
Yeah.
And like shooting fish in a barrel, you're very good at that. They, overnight, before we recorded this, they approved $26 billion in aid for Israel, which includes about $18 billion in just military aid. So more bombs, more weapons for Rafah, and maybe, for the south of Lebanon.
And they banned TikTok.
To show that there's actually, some heart inside of these hollow husks that is the U.S. Administration, they are saying they are considering sanctioning units within the Israeli army that are responsible for war crimes.
Will never happen.
Do not expect this to happen, but they are saying. So this has been what the U.S. has been doing over the past several days. I don't know if you guys want to add anything.
First of all, I don't understand when they say they want a Palestinian state in the UN. So I don't know if I agree or disagree about that.
They mean the PA.
Yeah, they mean the PA, or we don't know the geography of this state.
This are making such a mockery of international law, of the UN. Really, they should be ejected from the UN, and UN HQ should be moved to Asia, where things are happening in the world. Constructive, productive, developmental things. It's enough already. I mean, the double standards you're talking about, they're in every single front. Oh, what does Cameron say, British Foreign Minister? We would massively retaliate if somebody hit one of our embassies. No, we cannot. We will not support a condemnation of the Israeli strike on Iran's embassy. Israel's committing genocide. Palestine can't be a state. It's a joke. It's a joke at this point. Credibility lost at this point will never be retaken.
And let's not forget that, we talk about the invasion of Rafah as if it's something that's coming up, when in reality, Rafah has already been besieged for weeks, months at this point, with the mass killings, with the bombings. It's just a nightmare. What's happening in Gaza is something that I feel that with what happened with Iran and all of these, that it was also an attempt at diverting attention from the genocide. And we shouldn't allow that. Anybody who is concerned on human life should not allow this to be forgotten.
The footage that's come out now, we've seen today, of mass graves being dug up in Shifa, and with people's doctors' arms tied up, hands tied up, is you think you've seen it all, and Israel will give you more atrocities to freak out over.
So I think that's the perfect spot to leave off for the week. Thank you so much for joining us. Please leave a like, please subscribe, share this video with your friends. Follow us on Instagram, on Telegram, on X. In the description below, you will find some of the articles we discussed this week. And if you're feeling generous, please leave a donation in our Patreon. For the Cradle News Roundup, my name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmin Narwani.